All right, ready to dive in. Today, we're going deep into a world you might not expect.
Deep dive time.
It's war and intellectual property.
Yeah, it's something that's more connected than a lot of people realize, actually.
You might think, wait, those seem totally different, but trust me, they've been linked for a long, long time.
It's not just about, like, who invented the toughest tank either. This stuff goes way beyond that, affecting everything from the medicine we rely on to, like, the future of AI.
And we've got some really interesting sources to unpack today. We're talking legal articles, even a whole U.S. government document on export violations. We'll get into exactly what that means a bit later.
What I find so fascinating is how these real-world cases show the tension between a nation's security and intellectual property rights.
Right, because those are two huge things.
Huge, and finding that balance, it's a tightrope walk.
So let's just jump right in.
Let's do it.
The first thing that really struck me was this idea of a national security exception that's built into international IP law. It kind of sounds like countries have this, like, loophole they can use to kind of bend the rules if things get dicey.
It sounds like a get-out-of-jail-free card, right? It's a lot more nuanced than that, though. Agreements like TRIPS, the trade-related aspects of intellectual property rights, they're meant to make things fair for everyone globally when it comes to IP.
Right, a level playing field.
Exactly. But they knew, national emergencies happen, so they built in this exception.
And we're seeing that play out right now with Russia's Decree 299 in the whole Ukraine situation.
Exactly. Russia basically said, we can use patents from unfriendly countries, and we're not paying royalties. So let's say there's some patented American tech. They're saying national security lets them use it, even without permission.
So just shouting national security is enough to get a free pass.
If only it were that easy. The World Trade Organization, the WTO, has stepped into situations like this before.
Yeah.
And those cases show it's not that simple. Like there was that one between Russia and Ukraine, and another with Saudi Arabia and Qatar.
So what happened?
The WTO basically said, hold on. You can't just pick and choose which rules you want to follow.
So it's more than just saying there's a threat. What are they looking for to make sure it's legit?
Good faith is a big one. It means a country can't just use this exception if it'll help their economy, you know what I mean?
Right, there's got to be a real threat.
There has to be a real, provable link between the IP and a genuine threat to their security. And even then, what they do has to be proportionate to that threat. Like, you can't have a minor border dispute and then say, well, guess we're seizing all patents in this entire industry.
So there are limits and consequences if a country's abusing the system.
Big time. The WTO rulings on cases like these show that international law, even with its exceptions, isn't something you can just, like, manipulate. It's there to keep things fair and in order.
Yeah.
Especially during conflicts.
It's wild to see how these legal battles play out. And speaking of battles, who knew aspirin had such a wild ride?
Oh, yeah. Tell me about it.
It's almost funny, but during World War I, Bayer, the German company, they lost their trademark here in the U.S. because of the war.
Wow.
All because of the war, yeah. So then competitors could just start selling their own versions, all called aspirin.
Can you imagine? Like, that's a corporate nightmare. And
Yeah.
I bet Bayer wasn't the only company dealing with this kind of thing back then.
Oh, absolutely not. In World War II, governments got really hands-on with IP then. Compulsory licensing was the name of the game.
Oh, right.
Can you break that down for us? What does compulsory licensing even mean?
So it's actually simpler than it sounds. Basically, the government could force a company to license out their inventions, even to competitors, if it was important enough for the war. Like, think penicillin. They had to mass produce that stuff. Necessary, but man.
Yeah, you got to wonder what happens to those companies after.
Totally. Do they bounce back? Does being forced to share their big innovations hurt them in the long run? It's a fascinating question,
Yeah.
and it's so relevant even today.
Yeah. That whole debate about the COVID vaccine patents, echoes of this, for sure.
Straight up, that was the same tension, urgent national, even global need, but then you have intellectual property rights. It shows that this isn't just like a law school exam question. This stuff is real.
And it affects everyone. It's about access. It's about innovation. It's even about, like we said, national security.
Absolutely. And it gets even more complicated when you think about the digital age. Forget physical inventions for a sec. Think software, think algorithms, even the code that makes those crazy AI weapons work.
Which brings us to those killer robots everyone's talking about. But we're going to get into that a bit later in the episode.
Definitely. And to really get that, we got to circle back to something we mentioned before, enforcement.
Okay, yeah.
Because even with all these rules, Actually making sure people follow IP law during a war, that's a whole other battle.
Right. It's not like you can just send a cease and desist letter in the middle of a war zone. So how does it actually play out in the real world?
Yeah.
How do you even enforce this stuff when a war is going on?
Right. Like, good luck with that. Courts might be barely functioning, communications all messed up, and suing someone while bombs are dropping. Yeah, not so easy.
So it's kind of a free-for-all for IP when things get bad?
You could say that. The rule of law gets shaky, that's for sure. But this is where it gets interesting strategically. Imagine you're a company, right? You're working in or maybe with a country where there's a conflict. Tough decisions.
Absolutely.
You might know someone's ripping off your patents or copyrights, but what are you going to do? Is suing them even possible? Never mind, worth the risk.
Especially if it's a government doing the infringing. It's not like you can take a whole country to court, right? That U.S. government document we have, it was full of these crazy cases. Companies caught red-handed sending sensitive tech to places they absolutely should not have.
Oh, yeah. We're not talking theory here. This document lays out how governments use things like export controls and sanctions. They're trying to, like, control the flow of technology, especially anything that can be used for military stuff. But of course, people are always trying to get around the rules.
It's not just shipping physical stuff either, right? Weren't there examples in there of companies getting in trouble for, like, transferring the intellectual property itself? Blueprints, software, that kind of thing?
Oh, totally. Information, that's the valuable stuff now. Governments know this. They're not just trying to stop a shipment of parts. They want to stop the knowledge that could let someone build dangerous tech, especially if it falls into the wrong hands.
It's a whole new kind of arms race, but it's invisible.
And with insanely high stakes.
Yeah. This is what I'm talking about, real world stuff. This isn't just some abstract legal debate in a classroom.
And if information is a weapon now, well, we got to talk about cyber warfare.
Gets really scary, really fast.
Doesn't it? A single line of code, it can cause more chaos than a bomb these days.
For sure.
And it kind of takes us back to what we were saying before about compulsory licensing during World War II.
How so?
Well, back then, governments could force companies to share for the war effort, right? Cyber warfare, it's a whole new level of that.
What do you mean?
Who controls the software, the algorithms, all the stuff that makes cyber warfare possible? Who's responsible when it's used? Especially if it does something they didn't expect. The programmer, the company, the government. Huge questions.
Yeah, no kidding. It's a lot harder to tell who's responsible in the digital world.
It gets very murky, very fast. And a lot of this tech, it relies on intellectual property, patented algorithms, copyrighted code. Trying to balance innovation with making sure this stuff isn't misused, it's a constant struggle.
We've talked a lot about governments, but what about everyday people? If information is being weaponized, what about the folks caught in the middle?
Oh, man. That's the part people forget too easily. It's easy to focus on the big guys, the governments, the corporations. But the human cost of conflict, that's what matters most.
Journalists, activists, even just regular people trying to share what's happening, how do we protect them when just speaking out could be seen as dangerous?
It's a huge question, especially with social media. Think how fast information or misinformation or propaganda, how fast it all spreads online. How do you balance a country's security with things like freedom of speech, the right to privacy?
I don't know, that's a minefield. And then you add in AI-generated content, deepfakes. It's getting impossible to tell what's real anymore.
And that confusion, that doubt, it can be a weapon too. We've seen governments try to control what people see and hear during conflicts. Information itself is a weapon.
It's like we're back where we started, but everything's way more intense now. We've seen how war has been shaping IP law for ages, but the digital world, it's a whole different ballgame.
It is. Tech's changing faster than we can write the rules for it, let alone figure out what's right and wrong, which is why it's so important to remember one thing.
So where do we even go from here? It feels almost impossible to, like, set rules for something that's changing so fast.
It's tough, no doubt, but not impossible. I think it helps to remember that IP, it's not just about protecting some invention or making sure companies make money. It's bigger than that. It's about, like, human ingenuity, encouraging progress.
Yeah.
Making sure everyone benefits from what we learn and create.
Yeah, it's easy to get lost in the legal weeds and forget the big picture.
For sure. So when we talk about solutions, we got to think about systems that support those values, like stronger international cooperation, for one.
Ah.
Legal frameworks that aren't so rigid, they can adapt as technology changes. And we got to make ethics a priority when we're building new tech. Can't just be an afterthought.
And this might sound kind of basic, but education is huge here, right?
Absolutely.
The more people understand what's at stake, the more we can all push for responsible innovation, hold the people in charge accountable.
100%. Awareness is everything. The more we understand IP, how it works, how it can be abused, how it affects our lives, all of that, the better we can deal with these crazy situations.
Like you said before, this isn't some theoretical debate. This stuff is happening now, and it's only going to get more intense as tech keeps changing.
And it's not just on the governments to fix. It's on all of us. Individuals have to understand their rights, but also their responsibilities in this new world.
So for our listener who's been with us on this wild ride through war and intellectual property, what's the one thing you want them to remember?
When you get right down to it, intellectual property, it's a reflection of us. It's about how creative we are, our potential to make things better, our shared history as humans. If we understand the forces that shape how knowledge is created, how it's shared, how it's even used as a weapon, then we can make smarter choices about the future.
That's a powerful thought. It's not just for the lawyers and the politicians, it's for everyone.
Exactly. This isn't just about some patent or a copyright lawsuit. It's about shaping a world where knowledge makes things better, helps us progress, benefits all of us.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And on that note, we'll leave you with one last thing to think about. As we try to navigate this crazy intersection of war, tech, and intellectual property, we got to ask, in a world drowning in information, how do we make sure knowledge brings us together instead of tearing us apart?
Keep asking the tough questions. Until next time.